Hello and welcome to a new episode of Josh's Car Corner, marking the 10th anniversary of the show. I uploaded the very first episode of Josh's Car Corner on August 28th, 2010. At that point I had owned the GTO for approximately 5 months and decided after owning it that long that I wanted to take a shot at making a car show on YouTube, which back then it wasn't new, but it was not the newest thing around either. It had only been around for a couple of years, and I just thought I would give it a try to make a little video about the GTO, do like a review of the car, and that's kind of where the whole thing started. So I thought, it's kind of cliche, I know other shows have done this too, but I thought what would be kind of interesting is to go back and look at that first episode that I made 10 years ago, what that was like, and the differences between then and now, and a little bit of backstory of where the whole idea came from to begin with. So, recording it on my computer here, so I'll fire it up and I'll stop every now and then and just add a little commentary from what I'm seeing. So, I've not watched this in about, 5 years, maybe more than 5 years. Let's just see what it was all about back in 2010. Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of Josh's Car Corner. Okay, first thing I'm going to say is I have no idea what I was doing with that goatee back then. Maybe that must have been the style back in 2010, but I haven't worn a goatee like that for a long time. And I remember when I was filming this that I was using the exact same make and model of camcorder that I use today, but back then I didn't own any cameras, and I'm borrowing these cameras from a friend of mine. And it's actually attached to a 2x4 in my garage. And just recording that way with no special microphones or anything, which is why the audio sounds a little grainy. This is an idea I got after watching Jay Leno's Garage. You may have seen it on the internet. That's absolutely true. The whole idea for this episode was based on, I had just learned about Jay Leno's Garage. I'd watched a few of his shows. I liked the way that he did reviews on cars, and I thought I would try to replicate that, not just in the design of it, but also a lot of his verbiage, a lot of the things he says, the way he talked. I tried to emulate that back then because I was trying to figure it out, and I thought the best thing to do was emulate one of the best people to do it. So let's keep watching. This is my 2006 Pontiac GTO. I got it 6 months ago. Fantastic car, absolutely love it. It's the second to last performance car that Pontiac ever built. The last one being obviously the G8. We actually kind of got this car by happy coincidence thanks to somebody who's no longer with General Motors, one of the great car guys, Bob Lutz. Back in 2002, when the Chevy Camaro died, the Pontiac Firebird died as well. They were built on the same platform, the F-body. So Pontiac had suddenly become a division that had no true performance car. They had Grand Prix and Grand Ams, but these were all front-wheel drive, and ironically, they were all built on pretty much the same platforms as just about every other car in the General Motors range. They just look different. So one of the things I'm doing here that I still have trouble with today is talking 100 miles an hour and sounding like I'm mumbling. It's something I constantly look at. I don't know where that comes from. I really must learn to talk slower. It was kind of left out with no real performance car. Also in 2002, Bob Lutz had gone to Australia for a business meeting with GM subsidiary in Australia, a company called Holden. And he was given this car to drive called the Monaro. It's a big two-door coupe with a Corvette engine, Corvette transmission, two-door, weighty car, very similar to like a Jaguar XK or an Aston Martin or something along those lines. And he loved it so much, he said, okay, that's it. We have to sell this car in America. It took only about 1.5 years to get everything done because ironically this car was already being sold around the world. It had actually been in production since 2001, and it was already sold in Saudi Arabia and South Africa as a Chevrolet Lumina SS. So actually it was already made in left-hand drive, so very little development had to go into it. It still freaks me out seeing a GTO or a Monaro with Chevy badges on it, but it's funny, that's how they sell it in the UAE as a Chevy Lumina SS, but in Australia, there is this group of people that likes to put Chevy badges on their Holdens and run them around pretending that they're Chevys because they use a Chevy engine. I would disagree with that. I'd say it's really a GM engine because it's used across makes. but that's one thing that they do like to do in Australia that I find kind of interesting. Making this car, they basically just had to change some cosmetics to appeal a bit more to the American market, put some Pontiac badges on it, change the engine very slightly to meet US emissions, and that was it. And in 2004, this car debuted in America with the Corvette LS1 engine, 350 horsepower, and you had your choice of a 4-speed automatic or a 6-speed manual, the same transmissions that you got in the Corvette. It wasn't a very warm reception. People thought it was a bit too dull, too bland. It didn't really have much of a standout personality. The originals in 2004 had a flat hood that did not have hood scoops. They had a single exhaust on the driver's side. They were only offered with 17-inch wheels. Although you could get a sport appearance package that gave you a nicer hood, it was really only until the very end of the run of 2004. That first year, with the exception of the front bumper, all of the parts that were used on the 04 GTO were the exact same parts that were used on the VZ platform Monaro. And actually the hood that we got in 05 and 06 was in use, but it was in use by HSV. And our version of the LS1 did have 350 horsepower because, and this is a weird thing, they couldn't just use Australian produced LS engines and then ship the cars over because according to the US government they wouldn't have met emission standards. So in this weird thing just to make the cars, they had to build the engines in the US, ship them over to Australia, have them thrown in the cars, and then the whole car can be shipped back. And because it has an American engine, it now will meet US EPA standards and then they can sell it here. And the interesting thing about that is our LS1 had 350 horsepower. The hottest version they got in the HSV made 382 horsepower. So they got more horsepower, and at least until 2005 when we got the LS2. They never got the LS2 except in HSV. Let's get back to the video. The reception was so cold in that first year, they made some changes, and in 2005 they also changed the engine. Because the new Corvette was out and was no longer using the LS1, they needed to change engines and upgrade to the LS2. 400 horsepower as opposed to 350. Same transmissions as before. They did upgrade the suspension a little bit. They upgraded the brakes. They now offered 18-inch wheels, and they all got these hoods with the scoops. They got the dual exhaust setup in the back, true dual exhaust all the way back, and they also were offered, again, with the sport appearance package. This is something I did cover in an episode. 2004 models did get smaller brakes, and they did have a different rear differential housing. I think it's a little weaker, and the drive shaft is also, it's about the same length, but the connection is a little bit different on the drive shaft end. There are differences between the 2 years, 2004 and 5. This car is actually the predecessor to the current G8. In Australia, as Holden, this car was also built in a 4-door variant that was known as the Commodore. And the G8 is essentially the next generation of the current Commodore. Holden decided not to build a 2-door version of the newer generation, so there is no 2-door car anymore, so there are no longer any Monaros, or what we call the GTO. Now, they did try. They had made a concept car, if you've never heard of it, called the Coupe 60, which you should check out. They did want to try to sell people on a 2-door version of the VE platform, and for financial reasons or whatever reasons, they never built it, but the Coupe 60 is a very cool car that if you don't know about it, you should research it and check it out because it would have been a monster. Now there's only Commodores, and we got the G8 for obviously a year and a half, and now Pontiac is gone, we don't have that anymore. If you're a fan of Top Gear, you'll probably see on a couple of different episodes them testing their version of the Monaro. Those rocker panels on that particular car, I have never seen those anywhere else. They don't have those in Australia. Theirs are either flat like ours or on HSVs swoop back from the front corner, and they don't have those little grill inserts in the front like that. So that particular rocker panel is a British only version, but that is the HSV front bumper on that thing, and I think they also got the HSV rear bumper on their cars. It has different body styling obviously and different wheels, but it is essentially the same car. Their LS1 was a little bit more powerful, the same as the Australians for emissions reasons I imagine, but in the last generations they also got the LS2. And as I said, this one is a 2006, so it does. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things back then, and I've been corrected by friends in Australia and by you on things at the times. I don't claim to know everything. And if I'm wrong, I will normally correct myself, or at least say, hey, I was wrong. It does have the LS2. It has a little bit more than 400 horsepower. I've made a couple of modifications. It's probably more around 440, somewhere around those lines. But it is a fantastic car. I mean, if you are interested in a good, reliable performance car, you really don't have a lot of choices these days. I mean, you obviously have Mustangs. If you're a Ford guy, you like Mustangs. And then there's Corvettes, but Corvettes are still very expensive, even used ones. A current generation Corvette used right now, you'd basically be looking to get in the door around maybe $25,000. Whereas if we use one of these, you can get right now for about $15,000 to $20,000. And if you're interested in lots of power, a very comfortable ride, being able to just go long distances without having to be tired or anything, and a little bit of handling, this is the car for you by all means. You know what's funny is, even today, good unmolested low mileage versions of an 05 or an 06 GTO will still fetch $15,000 to $20,000 just as they did back then. So I know a lot of people say that the values on the GTOs are going down, and on some of them they are when they get high mileage or they're heavily modified or they're beaten into the ground. But the low mileage unmolested ones are retaining their value. It's something a lot of people don't talk about, and I think should be brought up more, because the more of the ones that are just driven every day and beaten into the ground get taken off the road and disappear, those cars are going to start to go back up in value. That's already starting. It's basically what a Jaguar XK8 would be, or an Aston Martin, but for a fraction of the price. This one does have the factory 18-inch wheels on it. I like these very much. I think they look way better than the 17s. It got Corvette brakes scuffed back then.
In 2005 and 6. Not the biggest ones, not like off of the Z06 or anything, just the standard brakes.
Interesting fun fact, there's a guy in Chicago that makes brake adapter kits to put the 14-inch Camaro SS brakes on a GTO now. When he needed a set of factory 18-inch wheels to trial his setup to make sure it would clear the factory 18s, I traded him those 18-inch wheels off my car for a set of 17-inch tires, brand new, because I had a set of 17-inch wheels, just because it was a lot cheaper back then than getting a whole new set of 18-inch tires. So a little bit of trivia.
But they get the job done. They work very nice. It's also got a wonderful stereo inside, although you can tell it is Australian in nature because the on and off switch is on the passenger side of the radio. Oh, and the handbrake is too. Is another way you can tell this car was originally built for a right-hand drive country. But that's okay. It's really not that difficult, and it's a lot of fun. The only difference between this and say an 05, which had the same engine, is minor little interior touches like a door lock button or steering wheel controls that light up or different taillights, but that's really the only difference. They actually built this car for an additional 6 months after they quit making it in Australia just for the American market. They actually stopped.
That is true. They stopped VZ platform of the Monaro at the end of 2005, and they did have HSV production for 06 of the VZ Coupe, but they were taking GTOs off the line at that point. Before they got their firewall put in and everything for right-hand drive, they were taking those shells and making those into HSV VZ Coupes. And they were, and I think they only made them as long as GTOs got produced in 2006 for us. So another little bit of trivia.
Production of this car at the end of 2005, and then through June 2006, they continued to make just the GTO for us, and then the line was shut down altogether. And then that was the end of it. But it is a fantastic car. I had a great time in it. With this LS2 engine, you can get to 60 miles an hour in under 5 seconds. Quarter miles, right around 13 flat, a little bit of work, you're easily into the 12s. And it's really not.
First time I actually drag raced the GTO was with my buddy Joe, and it was one of the first times he'd actually drag raced the GXP, and it was an April night, and it was like low 40s, high 30s out, and it was so cold, but we were both trying to get into the 12s, and we both did, and it's one of those things, that friendly rivalry that I hold over his head, because he was the first manual GXP in the country in the 12s that night. There was another guy in an automatic that hit the 12s before him, but he was the first manual, and he ran a 12.921 that night. And this was the first time I had ever drag raced the GTO, and God, I wish I had footage of it. But I went out there and ran 12.916, 5 thousandths of a second faster. So it's just one of those great stories. But first time we both ran our cars like that at the drag, so we both got into the 12s, and he actually set a record that holds to this day, first 12-second manual GXP.
Not that bad at handling a car. I mean, it is a bit weighty. I think factory they're about 3,725 pounds. This one's a little less. It's probably, but it's still probably very high 3,600s. But with a couple of little upgrades to suspension and springs and things like that, they can be a very competent handling car and ride very nicely. And it still gets good mileage. I mean, you put it in a 6th gear and you set the cruise and you're getting 24, 25 miles to the gallon. I know it doesn't sound like a lot in the world of Priuses and little compacts, but when you've got a 400 plus horsepower V8 under the hood, that's actually not doing too bad.
I haven't seen that kind of mileage, by the way, since I built the engine up in 2014. Those days are long gone. I think my best right now is usually about 18 on a good day. And you know what's funny? In a later episode of the show, I actually mentioned as soon as you start changing heads and changing cabs, the mileage goes right down the tank, and I am living proof. It happens.
One of the other great things about this car is if you didn't have much of a decision-making process, it really was the car for you. There were very few options. I mean, basically you had a choice of color, transmission, and you could have a sunroof, but that was an extremely rare option. Not a lot of guys went for that because obviously it compromised your headroom and all of that. What you saw is what you got. They always had an LS2 or LS1 depending on the year, and they always got the fabulous interior and radio and all the accoutrements. It really is a well put together car.
One thing we never got over here that irks me is we never got the digital climate control. But and now 10 years later, I understand why it would have been so expensive to re-retrofit it to make it work in our cars. It would have raised the price to a point where they probably would have sold fewer of them had they done that.
It's very comfortable, as I said. It's very nice inside. It's not like so many GM cars were American cars that are all plasticky and have heavy body panels. If you've ever owned a Chevy Silverado or even a Cadillac Escalade, you go and you look at the dashboard, you can just hit it. It's just one solid piece of hard plastic. Not this. This is very refined. It's got leather, very nice plastics. It all matches. It all fits perfectly. It's really a...
Did you see the garage light click off there? I was using the garage light to kind of help light the room. And it was on a timer. Middle of those little things.
Well-built car. Oh, and in case you're wondering what upgrades I've made to mine,
yeah, that came on the car. That was not my idea, that brute force intake. That didn't stay on there very long. As soon as I had enough money for a Veyron, I got a Veyron, and it legitimately made a difference. I verifiably a tenth or two at the track, just changing that.
Pretty basic. It's got long-tube headers on it, a MagnaFlow exhaust system, an AEM cold air intake, and a little bit of tuning with the help of a good friend of mine. And that's about it. I'm still getting very much used to the car. I'm still pretty green to it. Like I said, I've only had it since March, but it is a joy to get in and just go for a drive. It's nice and quiet on the highways, but then when you want to hear it, you can just go down a couple of gears and away you go. I've gotten a lot of waves and a lot of compliments. There aren't too many GTOs where I live, so it's not a very common car to see. But I kind of like that. I kind of like having a car where people turn their heads and go, hey, what's that? And then they ask you, and then you just let them know everything about it. And I love to do that. I love to let people know about cars. That's kind of why I decided to do this. But I think we've gotten to the...
It is why I decided to do this, but I never would have thought that Josh's Car Corner would have turned into the show it did, where I was doing DIY videos and covering car events and car shows. And when I first started doing it, I thought this is all I would be doing is reviewing cars, and it completely went the other direction. And I think that was actually better, because there's a million people, there's 100 Doug DeMuros out there reviewing cars, but there aren't a lot of people that work on the cars and show you how to fix them so you can do it yourself. So I'm really glad I went the direction I went with the show.
Point now where we should get out, take it out for a spin, show you what it sounds like, show you how it goes.
So here's another funny thing, and now I have to switch videos. And I don't know if YouTube still does this, but back in the day when you had a new account and you were uploading videos, until you had uploaded so many videos, you could not upload a video that was longer than 10 minutes. So as a result, the first episode of the show, I had to break it up into 3 segments because I had about 26 minutes of footage and I couldn't put it all in one giant video like I can these days. So I had to break it up. So now I have to actually back out of here and load up the second part, the first part of the test drive, which actually gets more views than the actual first part of the show does, because people love to see the cars being driven. I totally get that. And I tend to run on and say the same thing 4 or 5 times, or at least I did back then, before I knew how to edit properly. So let me get this queued up. Here's another piece of trivia right here. So I only had 2 cameras. I had the camcorder from my buddy, and he also had a GoPro Hero 1, the first generation of the Hero. You're going to see 3 different angles here though. So in order to show 3 different angles, this drive that I make, I had to make the same drive twice on 2 separate days. So the first day I had to do it with the GoPro facing forward, and then the next day I had to flip the camera backward and do the same drive again.
You know, you never forget just how much power this thing has. You're going 40 miles an hour in 4th gear, you're not even turning 2,000 RPM, you just roll into it just a little bit. 45, 50, 55, just like that. It's accelerating. I love it. This has got the MagnaFlow performance exhaust. It's actually a fantastic exhaust. It's nice and quiet when you just want to cruise and when you want to get around town, but then when you want to go give her the beans, man, it opens up and it just sounds fantastic.
I still have that exhaust today, 10 years later too. I can't quit it. It does sound good. And even with the power I'm making today, I do think about changing it, because I'm now starting to think where it might become a restriction point. But if I do, it's probably going to be one of the last things that I do, just because it does still sound pretty good.
Now we'll give her a bit of stick here, see what she sounds like.
It's amazing how I thought that was powerful back then. That was the first V8 muscle car I'd ever owned, because before that it was, well, God, turbo diesel Jetta, then my Grand Prix, but the Grand Prix was 270 at best. It couldn't accelerate like that thing could, even back then. So, but now I'm sure if I got in that car that I was in 10 years ago today, I would think it was a dog. I would probably think it is so slow. Because now I've got 500 horsepower, and it does feel different. You can totally tell.
It wasn't until I was about 22 or 23 that I finally got a manual transmission car again, my Z34 Lumina, which was a great time. I loved it.
And I've lost all the pictures of that Lumina. I don't have them anymore, so this is the last evidence I have of ever owning that thing. It was pretty.
I expect to come out the other side live, and then I got my Grand Prix, which was another great car. But again,
Do have plenty of footage of that car still, though.
It's also got a very basic engine. It's just 2 miles per cylinder, as all LS motors are. But it's not unsophisticated at all. It's got an aluminum block. It's got aluminum heads. It's a lightweight engine, and for its size and overall dimensions, it actually makes a lot of power.
That's actually true. A dressed LS2 with the accessory plate on it, with the AC compressor and alternator and everything. Well, not actually without the AC compressor, but with the alternator, weighs out at just a hair over 400 pounds, which I know sounds like a lot, but go take an old pig iron small block 350 and put the exact same accessories on it, and it's probably going to weigh about 600 pounds. So they are a very light engine.
You know, when you look at like the European supercars or even Italian supercars, you know, they've got 4 miles per cylinder and they've got crazy heads that flow a ridiculous amount of air, and that's all well and good until something goes wrong with it. Because especially if you drive in a performance-oriented way, eventually something is going to go wrong with your car. And if it costs more than the cost of the car to fix it, then it's a failure and it's not worth it. Whereas something like this, yes, okay, the engines are a little bit pricey, but the idea that it's ever going to catastrophically fail and you need a new engine is pretty remote. It's just simple, basic engineering, and it's a bit raw, I will admit, but at the same time, it's a lot of fun. And it's simple, and it's honest, and it is just
saw Jay Leno scream like that once. I thought I'd copy him and be cool.
It is just that much fun. And it's very comfortable. I mean, this is probably one of the most comfortable seats I've ever sat in, be it a house or a hotel or even any other car. It is just a fantastically comfortable seat, and that's the one thing that was very much praised by just about everybody who drove this car and tested it for some sort of magazine or something. It's just how comfortable this car is. When I bought this car, actually, I bought it in New Jersey and I drove it home, and it was a 1,000-mile trip. And for the past couple of years, I had owned a Volkswagen and then my Grand Prix, and in both of those cars, I couldn't drive them more than an hour and a half or 2 hours. My legs would start to cramp up, they'd start to ache, I'd have to squirm all around and try and find a way to get comfortable. I couldn't drive those cars long distances. I have to get out, I have to stop at a wayside, I have to stretch or something.
The Germans in particular are huge fans of rock hard seats. I don't know if they think it helps your posture, makes you sit up straight more or something, but I mean, every one I've ever drove, I mean, with the exception of my Audi, and that's probably because that seat was 20 years old and just beat to hell, that was comfortable. But yeah, my Jetta was very uncomfortable, and my girlfriend has a BMW now that we take on road trips, and yeah, after 2 hours, I am squirming. They just like for things to be rock hard for some odd reason.
Whereas this, I got in it, and I went across New Jersey, all of Pennsylvania, and halfway across Ohio. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was comfortable and awake and alert, and I was sitting there thinking, you know, if I just kept driving, I could be home by 9 a.m. I honestly entertained that idea. That's how comfortable it was. But, I mean, better common sense kicked in and said, no, you know, you've been driving for 10 hours, you really should stop. And I did.
And I think the real testament of that is in 2013 when I did that 21-day road trip across the country, and every day I was driving at least 8 hours and never got uncomfortable. I think that's a better testament than just the driving at home part, because that was 2 days. 20 versus 20, and I would do that 20-day road trip again. Well, I'd probably put the suspension back to stock, but I would totally do that trip again in that car any day.
But it is just one of those cars that you can just drive infinite expanses and just enjoy.
The last part's a little long-winded. It actually has the fewest views. We're not going to sit through the whole last part of this, but I will just go to the end really quick, because that was the first time I had ever done a standing start burnout in the car. And I have that on camera, so we'll watch that, the very last part here, the standing start burnout, and we'll wrap it up there. So let's see, it goes right here, we'll just go to.
And quite honestly, you just cannot beat that combination. Well, that's it for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you like it, we'll do another one sometime. Oh, and in case you're wondering if it can do a burnout, yes, it can.
And of course, I did this because Jay Leno used to do it at the end of every episode. Let's watch a burnout. And that was it. That was the very first episode of Josh's Car Corner. Rewatched again for the first time, at least by me, in 5 years. So very cool to see that again. I hope you enjoyed it. And, you know, there are a lot of good things in some of the older episodes that I don't make mention of, and maybe I should. I think I'll go on the Facebook page and I'll make a list of, because there's a lot of DIY stuff I did in some of those early episodes, and some things I did that a lot of people don't know about because they aren't in the headline of the video. So I think I'm going to make that list, because this is officially the 77th episode of Josh's Car Corner, and there's going to be a lot more coming, because I finally started ordering parts to put the GTO back together. I put together 2 separate orders in the last week, about, $1,500 worth of parts to get ready to put the thing back together. The block is at my engine builders right now. They're going to strip it down, wash it out, clean it, inspect everything, make sure it's in good shape, fix whatever needs fixing, and going to start putting that thing back together very soon. And the goal is by the end of October, have the GTO back up together and running with a little more power, and be back to enjoying the car and doing videos with it again. And then after that comes the ute. Start working on that, start putting that back together. And then I've got friends in the meantime who are gonna want things done on their cars, and we'll shoot videos on that too. So as has now become my goal with Josh's Car Corner is to teach you how to work on your car so you don't have to pay someone else to do it and question whether they're doing a good job and put your trust in somebody else to take care of your car. You can work on it, you can fix it yourself, and therefore take more pride in your car because you wrenched on it, you did the work, and you can enjoy it. So thank you for everybody who has watched Josh's Car Corner for the last 10 years. I appreciate it. I appreciate your support. And I'm going to stay here and I'm going to keep doing these shows for a long time because the Holden love ain't going away, as you can tell, now that I bought a ute. So keep watching, and thanks once again, and see you next time.